Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Blinken, thank you for being willing to consider being nominated to this important post at this critical time and for being here today. One of the things we've heard in the last few days is the President-elect Biden's interest in resuming the United States' position in a number of international alliances, from everything from the Paris Climate Accords to the WHO. But clearly it's going to take more than that to rebuild our relationships around the world. So what else do we need to do, and what are you thinking about as, if you're confirmed, that you think is going to be important to restoring those relationships?
Senator, I think we have and several members of the committee have already alluded to this, we do have a big task ahead of us in restoring, revitalizing those relationships. I do think it starts, to use a colloquial term, with showing up again, with being present, with having our diplomats engaged in the painstaking, sometimes not very glamorous, hard work of day in, day out diplomacy, and being in the room, not pulling back from it. And I know sometimes that sounds trite, but I just think that we are so much better off, even in institutions and organizations that are clearly imperfect and need reform. We're, as a general rule, much better off being at the table than being outside the room if we're going to try to influence those institutions and organizations and move them in a better direction. So I think you will see in a Biden administration that kind of engagement, that kind of leadership. I think it's also fair to say that some of our allies and partners question the sustainability of our commitments based on the experience of of recent years. And that's going to be a hard hill to climb, and they're going to have to make their own calculations about that. But I think it comes down to this. One is, and maybe this is an obligation that I think all of us share who are in this line of work. Part of our challenge, I think, is to connect what all of us are doing to the lives of the American people. Because if we want to have their support for American leadership, American engagement in the world, we have to demonstrate that it is actually making an improvement in their lives or preventing something bad from happening. And I think COVID-19, to some extent, has maybe brought that home as nothing else has in recent years, going back to 9/11. But there's so many other areas where what we're doing around the world connects directly to the lives that our fellow citizens are leading, and I think we need to make those connections. That'll give us a stronger foundation upon which to build an engaged foreign policy, and in turn one that's, I think, sustainable and that our partners and allies recognize as such. Last word on this. I think one of the things that we all have in common with our democratic partners and allies is the recognition that most of the challenges we face, as I mentioned earlier, simply can't be addressed effectively by any one country acting alone, even the United States. And so whether it's a global pandemic, whether it is a changing climate, whether it's the spread of bad weapons, you name it, all of these things demand international cooperation and coordination. And I believe that if we're stepping up and playing the role that we played in the past, but focused on the problems of today and tomorrow, we'll actually get a receptive audience to work with us.
Well, I certainly agree with that and agree with the importance of robust diplomatic efforts. And given the discussion about China this afternoon, it seems to me that we ought to look at what China is doing in terms of their increase in investments in diplomacy, their opening consulates around the world, their focus on economic assistance for other countries, because right now they're eating our lunch, and we better do better if we're going to be able to continue to compete. When you and I had the opportunity to talk a couple of weeks ago, which I very much appreciated, but one of the things we talked about were the attacks on our diplomatic personnel in Cuba and China and some other locations. And I and a number of other senators have continuously asked the State Department and Secretary Pompeo to provide information about those attacks, about what caused them, about our response to them, to make sure that our personnel are all treated fairly. And we were able to get some language into the defense bill that passed this year to do that. But we still have not seen all of the information that's available. Will you commit to being transparent with us about what's going on with those attacks and getting to the bottom of who's responsible and sharing that information with Congress and with the public where it's appropriate?
Yes, absolutely. And Senator, if I can just say first that your leadership on this issue, that of Senator Rubio, I know has been deeply appreciated within the department. I had some opportunity to get briefed on a few issues during this transition and nomination period, and one of the ones I asked for immediately was to get everything we knew about the so-called Havana syndrome and these attacks. And so I've read the reports. I was briefed on it. I welcome an opportunity to come and, if confirmed, to talk to all of you about it. Priority is making sure that our diplomats are safe and secure, but also that we find out who's responsible if a state actor or others are responsible, having accountability and making sure that we put the protections in place so that our folks are safe and secure. Would welcome working with the committee on that.
Good. I hope Senators Risch and Menendez that we can make that happen with this committee in the next month or so. Another topic we talked about briefly was the importance of ensuring that women are part of our foreign policy agenda. And I'm very proud to have worked on legislation to try and include women at the table when we're negotiating conflicts and to ensure that they're part of those efforts, because the data shows us that when that's the case, those kinds of peace negotiations have a 35% chance of lasting 15 years or longer. 35% better chance of lasting 15 years or longer. So it's something that makes sense. And I would hope, again, that the State Department would take more robust effort to be engaged in that. The Defense Department has, I think, been more proactive in that, and I hope that the state will join in those efforts in the coming year. But one of the areas where it's clearly an issue is in Afghanistan, and we have not gotten any commitment from the Taliban on the role of women in any future Afghan state post peace talks. So I wonder if you could talk about what you think we should be saying to the Taliban.
First, Senator, I couldn't agree more with the larger points you were making, and that is very much a lens that we would intend to put on our foreign policy and on the work of the State Department. And again, would welcome the opportunity to work with you on that. When it comes to Afghanistan, we have a real challenge there, to state the obvious. First, yes, we want to end this so-called forever war. We want to bring our forces home. We want to retain some capacity to deal with any resurgence of terrorism, which is what brought us there in the first place. And we have to look carefully at what has actually been negotiated. I haven't been privy to it yet, particularly with regard to the agreement that was reached in the first instance between the United States and the Taliban, to understand fully what commitments were made or not made by the Taliban, and then to see where they get in their negotiations with the government of Afghanistan. I don't believe that any outcome that they might achieve, the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban, is sustainable without protecting the gains that have been made by women and girls in Afghanistan over the last 20 years when it comes to access to education, to health care, to employment. And so I think we have a strong interest, if that agreement is actually, if there is an agreement, if it's going to hold up, to do what we can to make sure that those rights are preserved. But I would acknowledge to you I don't think that's going to be easy, but we will work on it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I intend to ask General Austin the same question at his hearing this afternoon. Can you finally, I know I'm almost out of time, but can you talk about what our response to Putin's taken into custody Mr. Navalny should be, and how we continue to put pressure on Russia?
It is extraordinary how frightened Vladimir Putin seems to be of one man. I think that speaks volumes. And Mr. Navalny is a voice, I think, for millions and millions and millions of Russians and their voice needs to be heard in Russia. And the attempts to silence that voice by silencing Mr. Navalny is something that we strongly condemn, and we've spoken to it, and will continue to do so. I would say more broadly, and this is probably a subject for ongoing conversation, we've talked about a number of challenges. The challenge posed by Russia across a whole series of fronts is also one that is urgent. I have to say that I think members of this committee, particularly Senator Romney, have been very prescient when it comes to the challenge posed to us by Russia. There's a lot to be discussed and talked about there, but this is very high on the agenda for an incoming administration.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen.